Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us again. This is the Coach's Corner University podcast, and I'm your host, Paul O'Need. Today, I'm joined by a friend of mine, someone who I feel like in the next few years you're going to get to know very well in the fitness space. He is a coach, he's an educator, and honestly, he's someone who has been doing things the right way. So I really wanted to chat with Dan today. Dan DeBrocke is my guest. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for the gracious introduction.
Well, I mean, it's my pleasure. When you gotta give respect where respect's due. And when I think of people starting out in this industry, there's there's a few ways you can go with it. You can work to gain the biggest audience possible through whatever means, or you can start with value and grow your audience organically, which obviously is going to take a lot longer, but the quality is better, the service is there, and you're starting from a place of giving rather than taking. And I think anyone who does that is someone that I'd want to speak to and I want to network with. And you definitely do just that. So let me give you your flowers to start off the podcast.
Thanks, dude.
Maybe for anyone who doesn't know, do you want to fill people in on maybe who you are, what you do?
Uh, yeah. So, I mean, right now I'm primarily a coach. Previously, I was a coach and an educator. So, I worked as director of education for Kabuki Strength. So, I developed a lot of educational curriculum for them, developed seminars and things like that for um, like certification programs for different organizations and even universities and things like that. I used to do a lot of speaking engagements and things like that. Now I still do, but it's mostly like virtual as opposed to actually having to travel other places. So about a year and a half ago or something like that, I parted ways with Kabuki and started my own company. And then I've just mostly been focusing on that and mostly on the coaching side of things. So I am
Mhm.
doing a lot of educational stuff now that I kind of hired a production team. So it's going to be coming out probably in the next little bit. But my main thing is just coaching at the
That's great, man. I mean,
moment.
I think we all go through different iterations of our careers. I mean, I've been in a few of them myself, and branching into the education space. Like let's just start there, because I mean, you're the director of education for Kabuki, and for anyone who has been living under a rock, Kabuki is one of the largest education companies in strength and conditioning, and rightfully so. They have so much content put out. Um, how did you, I guess, how did you get the job? Number one, and since leaving, what lessons have you brought with you?
So I got the job kind of by just chance, I guess. At that point, this was like
Don't sell yourself short, man.
no, I just mean kind of the process. Like I didn't intend to apply. To be honest,
Okay.
it kind of ended up happening. So this was like pre-COVID, and this was when I was starting to publish just like a ton of articles on a ton of different platforms.
Hmm.
And I published an article for Kabuki, and it did really really well. And so then they reached out to me again and asked me to write some more articles, and then I wrote like the really really big one on like recovery modalities.
Yeah, I remember that one.
That's kind of been like a big staple for their website since it's been up. And then since I wrote that, they reached out to me and they're like, hey, we've got an opening for like a coaching position. We want you to apply. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I didn't think much of it because I guess I didn't really put myself in that sort of category at the time. And so I applied, and it was actually probably a good thing because then I didn't really have a whole lot of pressure. Because I was like, oh, I'll interview, but it's a nice little
Yeah.
in my cap, I guess. But I didn't really think much of it, and so I interviewed, and then they called me back for a second interview, third interview, and all that sort of stuff. And then eventually they ended up offering me the job, which was pretty cool. So I started working for them, kept doing like a lot of articles and things like that. And they asked me to develop some like curriculum for them. So as I was doing that, I developed a couple courses or things like that for them. And then at the time, Brandon Sen, who was the operations director or something like that, or head coach, he offered me the job of director of education. And so then I kind of took over that. And that's when I really started kind of pushing a lot of that stuff. So I was responsible for like Kabuki Education Week 2022, I believe.
Yeah, the one that I think it was, yeah,
The one that
2020,
we're on.
2022. Yeah, because I did the lecture while I was on a cruise, I remember.
Yeah. And I did that and it ended up being like wildly successful. So that was really cool. And I developed a couple of like nutritional programs and some other things for them that also ended up being really, really successful. And I only kind of found out, I guess, retroactively how well these things did. Uh,
Mm.
and so that was kind of the first thing where I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe I have a bit of an aptitude for education communication or like science communication, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And so that was a big thing that I think I learned. I got the opportunity just because of the environment that I was in. I got the opportunity to kind of see things all the way through from like just sort of conceptual planning of what a course might look like, and then actually having to collaborate with different factions of the organization, like the media
Mm.
team and all these things. And so it's like I have to explain to them what we're doing and what sequence things should go in. And so it's kind of like writing an article, you know, like I don't know about you, whenever I write an article, I'll write all of it and then I read it and I'm like, this doesn't make sense. This section needs to be up here. And you kind of like have to rework it. But then the more
Mhm.
you do that, the more concise and clear you are at thinking and communicating. And so I think that was a really great opportunity for me because it allowed me to practice those skills a ton, um, which just made me, I guess, better at communicating things and better at, I guess, kind of like conceptualizing certain frameworks and what flow. So from like an
Yeah.
education development standpoint, that was really, really valuable. Just being around a lot of the people there was really cool. And then I think like even my confidence as a coach, I think grew a lot, especially when I left because I left being like, oh man, like I don't know if I can do this on my own. And like, you know, I went from like having this big, really fancy title to now I'm just Daniel DeBrocke, some fucking nobody. But then my business blew up. And then after that, it kind of like blew up and then kind of stagnated for a while. And then the last like 6 months, it like doubled or tripled almost. And so I was like, holy crap, like it's been really
Oh,
cool.
wow.
And so it's been going really, really well. And like the feedback that I've been getting, the amount of referrals that I've been getting, and then just even like requests that I've been getting has been the biggest thing that's been surprising. Like I've had like a lot of really, really big names and organizations reach out and want me to develop their educational programs for them. So that was really cool. Um, but interestingly enough, I've had to say no. Well, I haven't technically said no yet, but I will. I've just
Mhm.
yeah, let's talk about it because I don't. I always like to say yes until I have to say no, just because I don't want to say no to certain opportunities. But at the moment, just because the direction and the trajectory of my business is going, um, and the staff that I've had to kind of like help bring on, that's my main focus, and that's kind of been the biggest thing. So I really want to just make sure that I'm able to continue pumping out stuff like that. So even though these opportunities are really cool, um, just kind of having to like stay focused on a couple of really foundational things. It's been like a really big business lesson I've learned.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to tease out of that. The first one being, this opportunity came about simply by you doing a lot of work, right? The opportunity just to work for Kabuki came from you putting your effort towards things with no intent of getting any return, right? Aside from being published and getting some visibility, you just did the work. And then the work ended up being really good and you get noticed. The next thing I think is I don't think people realize how hard it is to work with a team. I think people believe that being on a team is this magical thing where all of a sudden everyone's working together for this unified goal. And it sounds great until you realize that without that high level project management, you're basically herding cats. And so you kind of had that firsthand where you're exposed to this what would seem like a well-oiled machine, and then you're in the middle of it going, whoa, whoa, guys, we need to go this way, and we all need to go this way, and this is what we're doing. So I think that's a super important lesson for people to learn. And I mean, I learned it myself. Now that we've branched out, added coaches, getting everyone on the same page is hard, especially when each person has their own job and their own responsibilities to come together for a unified task. Very challenging.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. And I mean, like, there's always going to be competing interests in terms of, you know, we might all have kind of the same goal, but then how we approach getting to that same goal is going to be really different. Like, even if you
Hmm.
look at it from like a political standpoint, I think most people would agree, like, hey, we should probably take care of our veterans. We should probably take care of some homeless issues. We should
Yeah.
probably, you know, make sure that everyone has some basic, you know, income that they can sustain themselves with and all that stuff. But then how you get there is going to be like really different. And it can oftentimes like end up derailing people if you just kind of are pulled in different directions. And so getting that like cohesion and making sure everyone's on the same page is definitely pretty hard.
The other thing I think is really interesting is you say that your business somehow miraculously grew and blew up, which
Well, I know how
I'm
it grew.
sure you know exactly why
Yeah.
it did that.
Yeah.
So maybe a little bit of additional context would be lovely for our listeners.
Yeah. So, I mean, man, for the longest time, I mean, you know this as well because
Yep.
like we worked together before, but for the longest time, I was like kind of thinking if I just put out a ton of content, people will start to know me and like me, and then they'll realize that like I'm the man, and they'll just want to work with me and all this other stuff. And it was like it was so backwards.
Hmm.
That's not sales. That's not lead gen. That's not any of that stuff. And so, but because I'd kind of invested so much time into writing, into doing podcasts, into being on other people's podcasts and my own pod and all this other stuff,
Yeah.
and I was like, it was kind of the whole sunken ship fallacy where I was like, you know what, I need to continue doing all these things. But then I actually started reading Alex Hormozi's, but actually it's funny. It's kind of a series of events. One of the things was I realized that I needed to stop reading. I realized that was probably one of the biggest constraints that I was putting on myself because like I would read so much. Like for the last probably I'm 35 now, probably like 20 years almost. I'd be reading anywhere between 1 to 4 books a week. You know, and that's combined. That's
That's wild.
combined. That's combined between physical books, ebooks, and audiobooks. So,
Right.
and then on top of that, like lectures and research and things like that. So I was just consuming an absurd amount of information. And the thing that I ended up realizing was I was like, man, you know, I know so much more than a lot of people that I'll look at who are way more successful than me. So it's like, if I
Hmm.
know more than them, why are they more successful? And it's like, oh, it's because I don't know more than them. I have more information, but information is not knowledge. And so
Very well said.
I lacked a lot of application. So I realized I needed to stop reading. I need to stop doing all this stuff. And this is just me. I'm not recommending people do this, but if you're someone who reads a lot and you're not doing anything and there's no sort of like outward manifestation of everything you've learned, then you haven't fucking learned anything. And that was something I had to realize. So I just stopped doing everything. And I was like, okay, what are the 4 fundamental things that I need to do every single day to have a crazy business? I was like, okay, 1, I need to prospect every single day. 2, I need to respond to my clients very rapidly, multiple times per day. 3, I need to do my client check-ins every day. 4, I need to do my client programs whenever they need to be updated, right? So whether it's on a Monday or Friday or whatever, because I do them
Yep.
weekly, right? And those are the only 4 things that I did. I just stopped everything else. I stopped posting content on social media. I stopped everything else. And I was worried that everything was just going to kind of come to a halt. And I had all these preconceptions around what was going to happen, and it was 100% wrong. And
So you're saying that just being a really fucking great coach made your business blow up.
well, being less distracted for sure, right? Because like I think a lot of the times for myself, and I've seen this for a lot of people. I mean, you as a coach, I guarantee you've seen this a million fucking times where
Yeah, for
everyone
sure.
has a solution. They're like, oh, I'm doing this, and therefore, I'm experiencing this problem, therefore I need to do that. And it's like, okay, well, the first step is how do you know that that problem you identified is actually the problem? And then
Hmm.
2, how do you know that the solution you're implementing is actually going to address that problem? What's the time course that you would know whether or not it's effective, and so on and so forth. So you kind of go down the road of that rabbit hole. And for me, it was just I was so distracted with all the different things that I was doing, and none of them were directly coming back to my bottom line or the service that I was producing. I was
Hmm.
trying to do all these things that I thought people wanted, and you know, people would like them and they'd appreciate it, but it wasn't the determining factor from whether or not they would actually decide to work with me and or stay with me. And so when I
Yep.
stopped doing all that stuff, I was like, oh, this is it. So I've been doing that long enough now that I've got a really good grasp of it. And it's no longer like, oh, I hope this works. It's like, no, this is very clear. It's so consistent and reliable every single month. My business is growing at X rate. My retention is still here. There are a number of referrals I'm getting, and it's just like slowly starting to expand and build out the infrastructure. So I have actual evidence to validate that what I'm doing is working. And so now that I've got that, more or less a pretty good grasp of that, now I'm starting to kind of expand. And like I said, I hired that production team, and so now I'm getting back into education. So I'm going to be basically recording multiple lectures every week, and then having the production team kind of splice them up, put them on YouTube, and then put them on like Instagram, and they're going to kind of build that out. And then after that, we're going to expand to my email list. After that, we're going to expand to Facebook and maybe TikTok and some other things, but they're going to manage all of that stuff, um, including the branding and all of that stuff. And so that's really going to help me out in terms of getting my reach going again. And that way I can just be able to focus on like the fundamental pillars of my business, because I think I really just got way too far away from what that was. And it was like, even though social media and content creation and all of that stuff does facilitate, financial growth and revenue, it doesn't directly do it necessarily, or at least it's
Mhm.
not necessarily a linear relationship. And I think
Yeah.
because I was assuming that this was going to lead to that, I kind of forgot a lot of the steps along the way that eventually do drive and kind of complete that circle. So now I just got back to the fundamentals. And then now that I have those fundamentals set, now when I do that content creation, it's always going to loop back to client generation, revenue, and whatever it is. So it's going to be a little bit more integrated, if that makes sense.
There's a lot of wisdom in that approach because it's a mistake that I think people make, starting off at the beginning where you said, I stopped reading, and I was like, amen. That was actually a lesson that one of my second boss ever gave me. It was a gentleman named Todd Hammer, who I'm actually having on the podcast tomorrow. Super excited about interviewing him. He told me, he's like, you need to stop reading about strength and conditioning. I was like, bro, what?
Yeah.
He's like, you need to stop reading about strength and conditioning and start learning more about people. I was like, whatever, dude. And now that's mainly what I read about is communication, psychology, behavior change, business philosophy, that sort of stuff, like how to speak to and appeal to people. And that's what will immediately return to your bottom line. So coming back to, if you provide a very high level of service and your clients are very happy, they're getting good results, they're going to start talking about you. And that's free marketing. So not only are you generating monthly recurring revenue from the clients that you're working with, they're going to bring you more clients because they're just genuinely happy. That's the first mistake I think a lot of people make, is they start looking outside of what they're actually doing, and instead of just focusing on doing what they do really, really well. So I think that was a huge, huge revelation that you had. Then next, jumping into, I think people look at social media as the top and bottom of the funnel. So they look at all their lead generation comes from social media. All of their energy should be dedicated there. But in reality, social media is more of a long tail approach. So you put it out there and then people trickle in after months. And I didn't realize this for a long time. And I mean, you and I work together in a business capacity where some of the stuff that worked a few years ago doesn't work anymore. And I think what we're seeing is not only the increase in number of people coaching online and putting out coaching content, but the fact that people are a bit more hesitant to spend money, especially when it comes to something as intimate as a coaching relationship. So they're going to want to see your content for a consistent period of time before they actually realize that you're the person they trust. But if you're out there engaging with your audience, like you said, prospecting every day, making sure that you're communicating in a timely fashion to people, adding value through the different things that you do, they're being exposed to you more frequently. So that time course between exposure and purchase gets shortened because there's so many more touch points along the way. That's where I do think social media is great. But if you're doing the content and it's only leading to social media posts, social media being like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you're missing that long form communication that should feed into the rest. And the long form is, and I know you, so I can say this with certainty, the long form communication is what you actually enjoy. So if you're going to spend more time doing long form communication and then you have a team behind you that you've outsourced to make the short form for you, bro, that's such a fucking win.
Yeah, that was a big realization too, that because I was just like, you see all these reels and they're like, oh, your hook needs to be like this and you're this, and I was just like, I just fucking hate that. And in my opinion, I think that although when you get into some of those details where it's like, hey, you do want to do this, you do want to like, it's like coaching, right? Like you can look at a program and be like, oh, you probably would want to tweak this, you probably want to tweak that, and you will make it better. But ultimately, if
Right.
they're working hard, they're recovering well, and they've checked off kind of the fundamentals, they're still going to get really good results, right?
Yep.
And so that's kind of how I was seeing it. And I was like, you know what? I would enjoy content creation way more. I'd be way more consistent with it, and I'd be way more disciplined, and I'd actually be able to produce something that's really, really fucking good if I do it my way and the things that I'm good at. And then I can just get them to chop it up and it'll be cool. And then for other social media content, I can maybe do like exercise demos or maybe just some little things here and there that maybe come to my mind randomly. And
Yep.
that's fine, right? Because that's pretty easy to do. But I'm not having to like think of all these random ideas because it's not necessarily how I like talking about things, anyways. Um,
Yeah. You enjoy the nuance.
yeah, well, I guess one thing that I really like is I'm a little bit kind of obsessive about things. And so, um, like I was talking to Greg Knuckles a long, long time ago, and
Mhm.
we were talking about doing an article or whatever for his website, and he was asking me about like how I think about things, and I was like, I don't really want to write an article because I have written articles like this before because people ask me to, and then I always regret it, you know, where it's like it's just an article that it's like 5 best exercises you're not doing, and I wrote those,
Right.
and I was like, I will never do that again. And like if I'm writing an article or if I'm making a video, I want to try and do it where it's like, this is the most comprehensive from start to finish on this subject. So all you need to do is go and watch this video or read this article. It's going to give you pretty much every single thing you need to know about this subject. Because
Mm.
like even though it's really tough and it's super laborious, when you finish it, there's like this really deep sense of like, like, man, I crushed that. Like I did a really good job and this is going to stand the test of time. And
Mhm.
um, and that's what I like. And then you can clip little things from that here and there or whatever. And whether or not I actually accomplish my objective, I don't know. But that is kind of my thought process, and that's what I try to do every time. Whether or not I do it, right?
How hard was it for you to accept that you needed to outsource something? Because I think coaches, I don't know if it's coaches, so I'm not going to generalize, but I think business owners in general, outsourcing is something that they struggle with, like giving up control.
Mhm.
I definitely have that about some things, but stuff that I'm not good at, I have no trouble saying, like, yeah, do this for me.
Um, I think I'm probably fairly similar in that regard, but I think also one of the things that really hit me that probably made it a little bit easier was sort of that realization, like if I actually knew what I was doing, then I'd probably already have the result. So I have to do, like, I tend to go into a lot of these, I guess, conversations already kind of assuming that there's a lot of shit that I just don't know. And so I'm much more open to try things, because I'm like, if I, it's like when you talk about the whole like fat nutritionist, and it's like, is it possible that you can be overweight and an effective nutritionist for sports performance and physique? Yes, it's physically possible. But from a probability standpoint, is there a
Right.
high probability that you're going to be that unicorn? Absolutely not. And the fact that people discuss and debate that as if it's like this quandary is fucking absurd to me. It's like you say this all the time. You're the product of your product,
Yeah.
you know? And I'll hear people talk about this stuff too. So I'm gonna go on a little tangent. I'll
Oh,
hear people
please.
talk about this and they'll say, oh, well, you know what? Like we just have different goals. Like, yes, I love fitness, but I love my wife and I have other, goals. Whereas these people are more serious about their training. And it's like, okay, so you're telling me you went to school for at least 4 years. You decided to turn this into a career. You still train 3 or 4 times a week and you still watch your diet, but somehow you don't have the result. Really? You're telling me it's not a priority. You're training 3 or 4 times a week and you're dieting, but somehow you don't have the result. It's like you don't need to train 5 hours a day, 6 days a week, and and be watching your clock being like, okay, now it's time to eat. Okay, now I gotta stop because it's like that's not how it works. It's like if you're training 3 or 4 times a week and you're doing some form of dieting and you just wait for 5 years, you're going to be fucking jacked or lean or
Yep.
strong or whatever. And so whenever I hear people say that, it's like, no, you just don't know. That's what it is. And I had to realize that for myself, because it's like, if I really knew this, like I might know conceptually, but again, it's like, it's not what you know, it's what you can do. And so, yeah, so that made it a whole lot easier for me to kind of accept that I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And man, I was so lucky actually, because one of my friends, he's a one of my best friends for a very long time. He started like a really successful real estate agency down in actually where you are,
Oh,
in
cool.
Ontario. And he had a girl who was referred to him by one of his friends, and she was just crushing it. His YouTube looks phenomenal. His social media looks phenomenal. And I was asking him about it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, she's super swamped, blah blah blah." And then just randomly, like maybe about a month ago, he's like, "Hey, do you still want to work with this girl?" And I was like, "Yes, definitely." And so we had a call. I was talking to her, and you know when you talk to someone, and it's just like, dude, you are so on. Like the questions that you're asking, I can
Hmm.
tell you really, really, really know what you're doing. Like that was the experience that I had with her, and she's just been phenomenal. Like, and
Yeah.
yeah, so
I had the same experience with the team that I hired for my YouTube stuff. Um, I mean, this shit's expensive. Like, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Content creation at a high level is expensive, but it's so worth it to have peace of mind that the information that you're producing is going to be used in an effective manner. Um, there's, I really hope that my editor pulls out the "it's not what you know, it's what you can do" into a training day clip. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
oh
Because
yeah, 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 yeah.
but you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I I'm totally fine to die on this hill when I say that if you are not big and strong, you shouldn't coach big, strong people.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, the reason I can coach some of the strongest people on the planet is because I have at one point been one of the strongest people on the planet. I know what it's like. I know what that feels like. I can coach bodybuilders to stage level leanness because I have been stage level lean and I know what that feels like. Was I good at it? Fuck no, but I've done it. And, yeah, I'm totally fine to say that I was a bad bodybuilder, Dan. I'm totally fine. Um, that all being said, there is a level of buy-in that you immediately get from a potential client and a client that you're working with when you're saying, "Hey, listen, I know what you're going through because I currently am pushing myself the same way that I'm pushing you. I am asking of you the same things I ask of myself every day." And I think you and I are not dissimilar in the fact that I don't care how busy my business gets. I'm still training 4 days a week. I'm still hitting my macros. I'm still going to do my cardio. I'm still going to get my steps. I'm still going to prioritize my health. I'm going to get as much sleep as is feasible, right? Does that mean I'm perfect? Fuck no. But you don't have to be perfect if you want to make progress. So whenever I see the fat strength coach or the weak strength coach and the fat nutritionist, I'm always like, you're missing the fucking point.
Yeah, and I mean by extension too, it's like if you can't manage your own lifestyle to the point where you can sustain those habits, then you don't know how to adapt it appropriately. So how are you going to help the lawyer who works 80 hours a week to get in shape? And it's like I hear this stuff all the time where people are like, "Oh, it's just not a good time for me." And I'm like, "Dude, that perspective is why you suck." You know? But it's true though. It's true
It is true. That's why I'm laughing.
because it's like I think a lot of people. So I actually literally I just recorded one lecture yesterday, and this was one thing that I was harping on because it's on behavior modulation. I was like, people assume that people that like they'll look at people who are really successful, have the result that they want. And you're like, oh, they don't experience the same obstacles that I do. And it's like you're an idiot. Of course they do. In fact, probably the reason why they're there is because they've experienced that, plus a whole host of additional barriers that you've never even thought of. And it's
Hmm.
because they've developed the requisite skill set to first identify what the problems are and then again adapt to whatever circumstances they need to in order to sustain some modicum of those productive behaviors. So it's not a, oh, now's a good time, therefore I'm starting, and now's not a good time, so I'm stopping. It's just you modify and it ends up being a spectrum. So you kind of turn the volume
Yeah.
up and down depending on where you're at and what your constraints are. And then you can still adapt. Like the number of people that I've coached, same with you, I guarantee it,
Yep.
who have had crazy shit happen, who still don't miss their training. It's like, that's the difference, you know? And it's like, oh, well, they don't have kids. Yes, they do. Oh, well, they don't have crazy work schedules. Yes, they do. It's like Joel, you know, Joel,
Yeah. Yeah.
he just competed in Vegas. And everyone's like, oh, I had this thing coming up and I had this. Dude, he wrote his final exam for his fucking doctorate 1 week prior to going. You think that was an insanely stressful period for him? Of course it
Yeah.
was. But he still did it and he got through it and he went there and he never fucking mentioned it even once. So shut the fuck up, you know, with your eyes on
Yeah.
my toe. It's like, all right, cool.
I think those same principles carry across everything that we do, whether it's training or business or even our relationships. Like, what are you going to tell your wife? Oh, hey, it's not a good time for me to be a good husband right now.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
not sure it works like that, buddy.
Yeah.
I also think that, I mean, this is a great way to pivot the conversation because I definitely wanted to go into this because behavior change is something that is being talked about more lately and rightfully so. And it's something that I've harped on for a while in that the line I love is your physiology only matters as much as your psychology allows. So, the science is very simple, especially when it comes to weight loss. Eat less, you move more, and you will lose weight. Now, when you talk about the the nuances of muscle retention, performance mitigation, well, now we're getting a little bit more into the weeds, and it does get a tad bit more complicated. But at the core of it is, let's eat less calories, let's do a little bit more physical activity to achieve a caloric deficit, and let's do that for a consistent period of time. You're someone who, like that article that you wrote on weight loss, it was a while ago. Very, very thorough article. And now you're doing a course on behavior change. Um, what are like the core tenets for you that you address with clients in terms of starting to adapt a different behavioral model?
It's a bit of a difficult question to answer. I think one of the first things I try to do, I guess, is I'm really heavy on education. So,
Okay.
like, when when I write a new program for someone, I'll record like a 30-minute video walking them through what we're doing, why we're doing it, why I chose these exercises, or if it's nutrition, like why I chose these specific interventions, what it's expected to do, what the time course is that I'd anticipate. If we run into this problem, here's what we'll do. If we run into that problem, here's what we'll do. You know what I mean? Like, so I really, really try and educate them so they understand what's going on because I think a lot of people have, you know, a lot of for lack of a better term, let's just call it like faulty operating systems, where they have all these preconceptions
Yeah.
around like, you know, this is the way things are and blah blah blah. And so a lot of what I have to do is in like kind of an empathetic way, just tell them, hey, like you don't know as much as you think, or else again, you probably have the results you wanted, right? So you need to be a lot more open to maybe some of the suggestions that I'm going to make, not blind faith, but just try them. And if they work,
Mhm.
then maybe let that validate that, hey, I don't know as much as I think at the moment. Let's just be more open to exploring things, right? Because that's a big one. And then I also encourage a lot of communication because the number of
Mhm.
times I've had clients reach out to me being like, hey, like, you know, oh, I can't do this. I'm so stressed out. I'm so this. And they just kind of vent. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I'll just kind of work through it with them. And I'll be like, all right, do you still feel like quitting? No, thank you so much. I really appreciate, you know what I mean? It's like
Yep.
it's in their head and they just kind of have to get it out. And then once they get it out and I get them to organize it, and it's like, none of that actually makes sense. So I don't know why I'm letting it control me. Okay. And it's like when you understand, I guess, yeah, like I said, sorry, this is a bit of a complicated way.
No, I think like let me spitball on it for you because I think that this is really good. So we do the same, like that resetting your attitude is something that I went through and I systemized kind of the way we operate. And I identified three values that our best clients have. And the first one was they're able to reset their attitude for success. And for me, what that means is almost like we show them the matrix, and we're like, hey, free your mind, because we're going to ask you to do a lot of different things. We're going to get you to relax. We're going to get you to focus on some very key factors, and we're going to let the other shit slide. And what you hit on is that just in people's lives, their lived experiences, they're coming into coaching probably having failed, probably having tried a number of different things without success, maybe had a coach who wasn't to the standard that you are going to hold yourself to. It's your job right off the bat to completely flip that on its head. And your what you've told me essentially is you do that through education, which is fantastic. But then you also built out the fact that that education has to be validated with results or else it means nothing. Right?
Mhm.
So once you're like getting that validation from them, or once you're getting them results, giving validation, obviously the next step would be kind of running them along that runway of progression.
Yeah. Well, I mean, um, I think there's generally like certain principles of behavior change that it doesn't necessarily matter what it is that you're doing. There's always going to be the same principles that you're implementing. It's just about how they change in application. And
Okay.
so, like, I think the things that I tend to use quite a bit are like sort of a combination between the BJ Fogg behavior change model, which is just sort of like, ability, motivation, action threshold, that whole thing. And then the Yerkes Dodson law about like, the optimal zone of stimulus, right? Or
Hmm.
stress response. And so, like, if you can kind of coordinate those two things pretty well and then explain to them why we're doing that, I think that tends to be really, really effective because when people aren't aware of their comfort zone and aware of like what needs to happen, a lot of the times they'll say, okay, these are the optimal behaviors that I need to do because that's what bodybuilders or strength athletes or whatever do. Before I need to adopt that. And it's like, okay, that's great, but you're not going to get there all in one day, right? That's like going into university and writing a doctoral thesis on day one. You don't have any
Right.
experience or skill or anything. So instead, why don't we just start here and say, okay, if this is the goal and these are the goal behaviors, let's just start here and then see how you do on that, and then slowly kind of progress over time. And kind of explaining to them too, like the idea of staying within your comfort zone is really important. I think that whole like change happens outside your comfort zone is sort of a misconception where more often than not, that's probably going to lead to recidivism. Whereas if you do something that's still within your threshold, then it allows you to actually have a productive adaptation. And I mean, this is the exact same thing. This is literally progressive overload. Like progressive overload is not doing something you can't do or you've never done before. It's like, that's not what progressive overload is. Like if you can't do it, you just can't do it, right? So
Right.
progressive overload is having a sort of a cumulative stimulus that builds over time that eventually leads to other things. And so like if you want to squat 500 pounds, you don't toss 500 pounds in the bar and then just try to squat it as many times as you can until eventually you can do it for a single. Like, because you're just going to keep failing over and over and over. And then that sort of reinforces this sort of, this like negative feedback loop. And a lot of people tend to have like a negative prediction error where so a negative prediction error is kind of like a neuroscience term where like there's positive prediction error and negative prediction error. And that's kind of considering like the reward. So if you predict that a reward is going to have this much value, but then the actual value you receive is less than that, that's a negative prediction error. And then if the reward is that you actually receive is higher than the perceived value, then that's a positive prediction error. So positive prediction error generally is more associated with success. Negative is the reverse. And so people will be like, oh, I'm going to diet and do all this stuff, and therefore I'm going to get really lean and super jacked and da da da. They do all this work and then they don't see any results because they haven't actually crossed the threshold to actually stimulate results just yet. They're still building that foundation of behaviors and adherence. And because of that, they have a negative prediction error, and therefore they're like, oh, well, I'm fuck it, I can't do it. And so it's like, okay, but that's not true. Like, you need to sort of rework your framework. And it's like, why do you think that that is going to be it? Like, do you think that you can control the rate of adaptation that you're going to accomplish? Like, it's not up to you to determine how quickly you can get stronger, how quickly you can lose fat. Like, there's definitely things that you can do to influence it, but at the end of the day, it's not up to you. There's a whole host of other variables that are coming into play there. And so, an appreciation of what the process actually looks like, and then understanding like your role in it, and things you can actually affect, is also pretty important. And then staying within that sort of, you know, I guess, optimal zone of stimulus is pretty important, because you're challenging yourself and you're feeling uncomfortable. You're developing new skills. You're getting new problems, which the goal should always be to get new problems. If you're dealing with the same problems in 5 years, then maybe you haven't fucking moved anywhere. So the goal is you want new problems. You want bigger problems. You want bigger challenges. And so if you're never getting those new challenges, then you're not going anywhere. But then sometimes people will solve this problem and then they get into a new problem. They're like, oh, well, now I'm just creating more problems for myself. And it's like, yes, but that's part of the process. This is actually a good
Yep.
thing. It's an indication of progression. And now you're going to have to manage this effectively. And now you're learning new skills. And that's how skill acquisition occurs. And that's why you see someone at this level who's able to balance all these things, whether it's their marriage and their training and their work and their company and all this other stuff. You're like, how the hell are they doing all that? It's like, yeah, that's a lot. That's a huge responsibility. But they've been building it for so long that now they just have so much experience and so much skill that they're able to manage it. They're able to outsource. They're able to, you know what I mean? They can kind of make those adjustments on the fly when need be. And
So I'm laughing
that
because
process is difficult to see from the outside.
I'm laughing because you just described, like, beautifully described behavior change in the context of nutrition and training. But you also just reiterated the exact journey that you went on with your business.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
literally. So like I hope the people listening kind of take heed of that, and that these principles are far reaching. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about training or nutrition or business or even marriage and relationships. Um, we are always we're always working to improve upon ourselves. And I also love the point that you made about staying within that zone of, like, within your comfort zone as you progress, because I do think people try to jump too far. And when you jump too far, you tend not to do very well. I mean, you might have the odd time where you take a shot from half court, it might go in, but for the most part, you're probably not going to be very successful taking that Hail Mary. And then that further feeds into this narrative of, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not successful, and your sense of self-efficacy just drops. And that's something that I think, if you adhere to the principles that you just outlined, what we're doing for our clients is we're building their confidence. We're building that self-efficacy, that confidence in their competence to continue to progress. And when we look at adherence long term, self-efficacy is the number one predictor. So if we are able to foster an intervention that is able to bring someone from point A to point B while stacking wins along the way, they're going to see C, D, E, F as eventualities
Mhm.
versus these like moonshot things that they might never achieve.
Yeah, and especially when you systemize things like, again, this is something I was talking about in the lecture series I was recording yesterday. Is like when you look at the stages of change model in behavior, there's a pre-contemplation phase, the contemplation phase, action, motive, like all that stuff. And like the termination phase is oftentimes like described as um, there's zero desire to repeat the undesirable habit, and you've encoded new behavior, right? Um, and actually, so there's a couple of things I probably want to talk about that. But I guess the main thing is this is something that I've experienced just so consistently within my own coaching practice, where I'll get a text randomly from someone, and usually it's around something like, if someone's been in pain for a long time, and we start working together to address the pain. If they've had some sort of eating that is disordered in its nature, whether it's full blown clinical or subclinical, if they have, or some other issue, right? They'll reach out just randomly one day and they'll be like, you know what? I was out with my friends the other day and we're just eating out and just kind of catching up, whatever. And then everyone else had dessert and they asked me if I wanted dessert. And I said no. And I genuinely meant it. And then they were like, and I realized that I have not had cravings for sweets and I don't even know how long. And they're like, this is something that I've struggled with since I was a kid, but for some reason now it's just not even an issue. And I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, it just stopped being a thing. And
Hmm.
that's that termination stage of behavior change. And I think that that's such an empowering thing because this is something that, for some people literally have struggled their entire lives with. They never thought they'd get over it. And then one day they realize that they're no longer controlled by it. And they have no idea what had happened, but it was somewhere along the way because it's not this automatic thing where you're like, okay, I'm done with it. But it's just you encoded these behaviors and you just kept doing it. Even though you have cravings, you maintained your restraint and you stuck with the path and you did over and over and over and over again. And then eventually it was done. And I think that that's such a huge milestone because when you accomplish something like that, you're like, hey, this is something I never thought I could do. And I did it. I wonder what else I could do now. And then you also start to understand the systematic nature of behavior modulation. You're like, oh, this is because of repeated behavior. In order to get repeated behavior, I need to have this set up. And in order to get that set up, I need to, and then you start reverse engineering everything,
Yeah.
right? And then even when you look at like the maintenance stages of the behavior change model, generally like you're looking at 6 month stages for some of the phases, but then one of the stages is the maintenance phase, which is, in the research it's lasting there between 6 months to 5 years. I've had people ask me, okay, why is there such a massive gap in terms of potentiality for duration? And I think the biggest thing is there's going to be a huge difference in terms of how difficult an encoded behavior is to adjust, right? Everyone's heard the
Mm.
whole it takes 21 days or 28 days or whatever to break a habit. And that's nonsense because that's assuming that every single habit is encoded for the same duration, is the same level of difficulty to change. That's ignoring any sort of physiological or psychological elements as well. So, for instance, like a substance or a chemical abuse issue, like a substance abuse issue,
Right.
like a fentanyl addiction. Okay, that is not going to be
Oof.
the same as like, hey, I need to stop picking my nose or something like that. You know what I mean? Like those two behaviors are going to be completely different in terms of how difficult and the time course that it's going to take to actually make those adjustments. And so I think when people look on Instagram and they say, oh, well, this guy had this transformation, therefore I should be getting this. And it's like, okay, you're making a snapshot decision based on incredibly limited information and just assuming that their situation applies perfectly to yours, which it doesn't. And so I think people run into a lot of problems with that. But again, like I said, once you kind of change that behavior and you understand how the model works, then you can be like, you know what, I can do this here, I can do this there, I can do this with my relationship, I can do it with my business, I can do it wherever. And then you start having a lot more success. And the funny thing is, so like I'll kind of, I guess, share a little bit of my own experience, not to get like too personal or anything, but when I was doing the things that I needed to do to grow my business, the entire time I was just like, this is not going to work. It's just going to fail. And the more money that I made and the more that I grew my business, the more that I was like, fuck, it's just all going to come crashing down. But that was a really negative encoding behavior because when we moved to Canada, like we immigrated here, we had a terrible situation growing up. We were so poor. Like I'm talking legitimate abject poverty, can't afford food, can't afford house, can't afford anything. And so that was just kind of my upbringing. And so now when I have money, I'm like so frugal with it, you know? And the entire time I was like, I feel so incredibly uncomfortable, even though I was making more money than I'd ever made legitimately before in my entire life. I was like,
Legitimately.
well, and
Yeah. No, yeah.
and and so the entire time I felt like everything was going to shit. I felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. I felt all of these things. But because I just kept doing the thing over and over and over, I still have those same feelings. But at least now I know. And it's like not just well, I think this makes sense, like a logical understanding. It's an actual knowing, like, no, 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 this works. And it's going to continue working because I've demonstrated that. There's no ambiguity around it, there's no questioning. It's like I have strong, strong evidence that this is true. And even though my emotional state hasn't necessarily caught up with that yet, eventually it will. And that's a really difficult thing that people grapple with is they don't feel a certain way and they expect to, but you can't expect everything to kind of progress linearly or I guess in tandem necessarily.
I think that is a very insightful point to make because,
I'm an insightful guy, man.
dude, I'm really enjoying this because, listen, I made more money than I've ever made in my whole life the last few years.
It's
I
crazy.
always
Congratulations on that, dude. That's
thank you very much. And I think, yeah, for anyone watching, I made a $4 billion last year. It doesn't matter. I could have made what I made. I could have made twice what I made. I will still be afraid of being poor.
Yeah.
I will still be afraid of being poor, but you know what? It doesn't make me less grateful for what I've achieved. It doesn't make me any less motivated. It doesn't hinder my behaviors because I know that what I'm doing is working, and I don't live in fear. Like, I don't live in fear. I just have these feelings and I've gotten better at dealing with them. And I think the same thing goes with, bringing it back to nutrition or to training. I'm not in pain anymore when I'm training, but I'm still scared of being in pain. But I know that the things that I'm doing keep me out of pain. So I'm just going to keep doing those things. I'm always still afraid that I'm going to be a fat kid again. But I know that the behaviors that I engage in on a daily basis will prevent me from being a fat kid. And I think people have this misconception that all of a sudden, once you've achieved X, Y, or Z, that the feelings associated with that achievement completely trump everything else. And I think all they do is provide validation of the process, and you just get better at dealing with those feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's probably the biggest barrier that I face working with, like, in the mentorship capacity with younger coaches, in that they haven't had enough success to validate the process, but they're so impatient that they end up jumping from thing to thing. Bring it full circle back to what you said before. Like, you have to have enough time to know what's working and what's not. And that level of patience is something that I think is learned over time, but I'm still trying to figure out how to expedite that for people.
It's tricky, but I mean, I honestly think that's just kind of part of the human condition, especially so like I have a client and she is super disciplined, right? Like
Mhm.
she is a beginner, right? But she came in and she had, her own subset of obstacles and barriers and things like that and preconceptions, which everyone does. And we started and I kind of explained the process to her. And I think one of the things that, in my experience, has been so helpful is accuracy of predictive power. So I'll usually try and lay out what the process will look like, and I'll usually try and lay out, between 2 and 3 potential alternatives, and I'll lay it out
Okay.
in pretty great detail because they'll say, okay, here's what I would expect, and here's what we can do, and da 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 da, and this is what it'll look like, and this is generally what you can expect. Or it could look like this if you decide to do it this way, or it could look like this. Okay. And then we usually kind of pick which approach seems a little bit seems most appropriate for that particular individual's context, where they're at right now, and their, preferences and things like that. So we choose that, they start doing it, and it basically happens exactly like that, you know. And I'm not a fortune teller. It's like I've been a coach for 12 years now. You've been a coach for a very long time. It's pretty easy. Like, you just see certain patterns.
Thanks for not aging me.
And yeah, and and I think, like, when you do that, it gives people a lot of confidence because they're like, oh, okay, he knows what he's doing, and like that matches
Mhm.
my experience almost perfectly. But even though I did that with her, she was training, so she wanted to train 6 days a week. She wanted to do all these different things, and I was like, no. I was like, we're going to start with 4 days a week. And she's like, okay, well, what about cardio? And I was like, I don't want you to do cardio, but if you want to just go for a run because you feel good on your recovery days or something like that, because like I get that, like I need to be active every single day, but I'm not training
Mhm.
every day. So I was like, if you need that, then go right ahead. But just don't think of it as training. Just do it to kind of feel good. And so she was doing that, and then she, exactly how I said, I was like, for the first 4 weeks, right now, because of where you're at, you're probably, we'll see some results, but it's probably not going to be anything crazy. But around the 4 to 6 week mark, all of a sudden the behaviors are going to kind of catch up, and they're going to start to reach this sort of escape velocity. And then everything is just going to spike up and hit this target, and you're going to start seeing really, really rapid results. And then it's going to continue going, and we're not going to want to make any changes, blah, blah, blah. Literally exactly that happened. At the 4 week mark, she had lost, I think, only maybe like 3 or 4 pounds, which is, it's not terrible,
Still pretty
right?
good. Yeah.
But it's not anything crazy. But then within the next 6 weeks, she lost 15 pounds or something like that, right?
Oof.
And she's getting stronger. Her definition is much better. She's adhering to her diet. Her sleep is better. Her stress is way lower. Her mood, her fatigue, like every single metric improved, which is like, okay, she's not losing muscle. There's no fucking way because her performance is
Mhm.
improving drastically. Her
Mhm.
physique, you can just tell she's looking much, much tighter. Everything's looking better, but she's still wanting to do more. And I'm having to be like, no, you don't want to do more. Just do this. Just do this. Just be patient. And it's like, you sometimes have to talk people off that ledge, even though what they're trying to do is like in theory productive and beneficial. It's like, just stick to the plan. And like, it's like, it's almost like you're on a racetrack about to run like the 100-meter sprint or whatever. And like the guy's there with a gun. You're just like, you're trying to hold yourself back, or it's like a dog who sees a tree and he's got this crazy internal battle going on. And like, it's so hard to do that sometimes. But then the more you let yourself kind of do extra, at first it ends up being good. And then extra turns into things that actually end up being counterproductive. And it's like, it's so hard to just stay disciplined and do the same thing over and over and over and just be patient. It's like, you always want to be doing something. And it's so fucking hard to just tell yourself to shut up sometimes.
I remember there's a quote by the Chinese weightlifting team's head coach. He was asked what the difference was between Olympic champions and the people that just qualify. And he's like, the champions can do the same shit every day without getting bored. And it could not be further from the truth. Like, my days are pretty much Groundhog Day. You
Yeah.
know, the stuff that I do for business growth is the same as it has been for the last little bit. It's gotten a bit more refined over the months and years, but at the end of the day, we're still doing the same thing. We're still providing a high level of service. We're still looking at ways where we can optimize that service even further for our clients. And I actually was asked. Well, I mean, you asked me in our conversation. We were talking about business growth, and you're asking me like, how we ended up doing it. And I was like, man, we just coach people really well and they tell people about us. And that's how we built our business. That's how I went from coaching by myself to having 5, 6 other coaches now working with me. And truly, it is the most sustainable way to grow a business because you're not reliant on algorithms. You're not reliant on ad revenue. You're not reliant on any of these vanity metrics like followers and things like that. And I think if I can tease anything out of this conversation, it's just really focus on what matters and get really good at that and then build.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because that's kind of where I'm at in my business right now. We were having a conversation yesterday where it's
Mhm.
like, I'm getting such consistent feedback on like the quality of service I'm delivering as well as like just the results. But there's still this sort of intuitive feeling where I'm like, something's missing, you know? And this is my own standard that I'm setting for myself. I'm like, I
Sure.
feel like something's missing. Like, I know what I'm doing is really good, but could I say that the service that I'm offering is like the best in the world? And I'm like, no, I don't think it is. And I have an intuitive sense that I'm missing something. And so I'm actually booking calls with like a handful of coaches that I really, really like. I know are like super solid because I want to know what they're doing. And then hopefully that'll
Mhm.
kind of catalyze some other ideas and things like that. But it's kind of an interesting process because for me, even though I am doing that stuff and I'm growing my business at a fairly predictable rate, I want to make sure that I have my offer, the service delivery, everything. Like it's all pretty dialed in, but I want to make sure I can kind of push it to that next level and then really streamline everything before I really
Mhm.
grow rapidly. Because in the past, I've done that where I've grown and I've had tons of clients and then I couldn't sustain it because my systems were not in place and I kind of lost track, and like this is,
Well, that's how we met, right? Like that's how we started working together, right?
yeah, yeah. And so it's just like, I don't know. It's interesting. Like you were saying, yeah, like high level fighters, high level lifters, they do the basics, but they do them at a very, very high level. You know?
Yeah, I think my 2 cents on the being the best coach in the world, I firmly believe that you could be the best coach in the world for the right person without changing anything that you're doing. And I think what the difference is between those people who you identify as being the best coaches in the world is they do a really good job at attracting the best clients in the world for them.
Yeah. I mean, so I
And
definitely agree with that. I guess it's more of an impossible standard that I'm trying to reach towards. I don't think I would ever accomplish it, nor do I think it's even an objectively achievable task. It's
Right.
more just like I want to know, kind of like I know. So like right now I'm 260 and I'm like probably 14% body fat or something like that. So it's like I've got abs,
Mhm.
I've got veins on my abs and on my quads, and I'm like, okay, this is pretty dope. Am I where I want to be? No. I want to be like about 270 and like 10%. That'll be like, okay, that's where I'm at, especially since I started fighting again. But it's like, even though I'm not there yet, I know that I will eventually get there. And once I get there, I'm like, okay, that's solid. And so right now I'm at a point where I'm working towards that sort of ideal. And once I get there, I know that even though I may not be, let's say, like the best in the world at something, I know that I'll be like, you know what? I 100% know with every single ounce of my being that what I offer is fucking ridiculous. Like it's absurd, you know? And that
You
level of
nailed it.
confidence is again coming from like that really large body of cumulative evidence of like, this is my
Mhm.
client roster. Look at how fucking shredded they are. Look at how strong they are. Look at how whatever. And and so I guess that's kind of the standard. Same thing with like the articles, right? Like, am I the best writer in the world? No, I'm not. But that's what I'm trying. That's what I have in my head when I'm writing,
Yeah.
and so it'll hopefully make me better over time.
I think it's inevitable that you will get better over time. And it's, to me, that's the only way to approach things. Like if you approach it with the intent of doing the best job you possibly can, there is no way that you can fail unless you're delusional,
Yeah,
which you're
yeah,
not. So there you go. Um, I think that's a phenomenal way to kind of wrap up the real portion of the podcast. I do have two ridiculous questions for you in keeping with the history of my podcast. I always ask two stupid questions at the end. The first one is, if you could engage in a mixed martial arts fight with any public figure, who would it be?
Oh, Justin Trudeau. Oh, for sure, for sure.
No
I
hesitation.
would
JT.
ragdoll that motherfucker. I fucking hate that guy. He's destroyed Canada. We came here.
Please, YouTube, don't cancel me.
We came here, and this country was so great when we came here. I could not believe how much freedom there was and economic opportunity, and now he's just completely destroyed it. So
Yeah.
that's what I get.
We actually had I had an appointment with an immigration lawyer on Wednesday. So looking at making a change for Master Athletic Performance. The next question is, what is the most ridiculous feat of strength you've ever seen in person?
It's ridiculous feat of strength. That's difficult to say. I think probably because of the context surrounding it. Andrew, when he deadlifted, it was the first time he deadlifted over 800 in the gym. But
In jeans.
yeah, because he hadn't trained. Like Andrew's weird. He trains for 3 weeks, then he doesn't train for like 2 months, or he'll train, but he'll like just do random stuff like in his and you know what I mean? It's not actual training, and he comes back and then he hits a PR, and so he doesn't wear a belt. He lifts in jeans, and he'll take like multiple weeks off, and then just come back and be like, "Well, I just want to see where my strength is at," and then he hits a PR, and I'm just like, "What the fuck, dude?" Like he's just a freak of strength.
He also weighs like 220 pounds. Like, he's not
Not
heavy.
even. Not even. He's yeah. He's just like you look at him and you're like, okay, yeah, he lifts weights. He looks like kind of a strong farm boy, but then when you see him train, you're like, dude, like, what the
Yeah,
fuck?
it's wild.
Yeah, it's
Um,
infuriating.
Last question. If there was one person that you would love to see me interview on this podcast, who would it be? But the caveat is you have to help me get them on the podcast.
Um, have you had Danny on yet? Danny Lamartine?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Uh,
She's my coach. I had to have her on.
yeah, yeah, fair. Yeah, well, that's what I was wondering. Man, that's a good question. Who? Maybe Justin Harris. Or
Okay.
yeah, Justin Harris or Christian Thibodeau. I can send Justin a message. Um, I haven't talked to him in a bit actually, but yeah.
Awesome. Dude, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'll have links to where everyone can find you in the show notes because you filled out my brand new podcast sign up sheet. I have all the information in it. So we're good to go.
So yeah,
Getting real professional in this bitch
yeah,
now.
yeah.
Any parting words for the audience?
Not really, man. Just thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's good to catch up and connect. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And we'll catch you on the next one.